Garrison Wyatt had spent 20 years convincing juries to believe uncomfortable truths, so when his wife of 11 years slid divorce papers across the kitchen counter like a restaurant check, he didn't cry, didn't beg. He just looked at her and asked 3 words. "Are you sure?" Vivian laughed like it was the punchline she'd been saving for months. She picked up her keys, said she'd never been more certain of anything, and walked out to where her personal trainer, Prescott Harlow, was already waiting in the car. She was wrong about that certainty. She was wrong about a lot of things. She just didn't find that out until she was sitting in a Philadelphia courtroom watching the color drain from her attorney's face while federal agents walked through the door. Garrison grew up in Kensington, the real Philadelphia. Chain-link fences and corner stores and parents who worked until their bodies gave out. His father drove a city bus for 31 years. His mother cleaned offices overnight and came home to make breakfast before school. They weren't poor in the dramatic way, just the quiet way, where there's always enough but never extra, where dignity is something you manufacture from whatever's available. Garrison learned early that the library was free and that stubbornness was a resource. He earned a scholarship to Temple, got into Penn Law, and turned down 3 times the salary at a private firm because he wanted to put people in prison who actually deserved to be there. That stubbornness cost him things over the years. It also saved him. He met Vivian Darrow at a charity event in Old City, the kind where expensive wine gets drunk for causes nobody remembers by morning. She was an interior designer, with a client list full of mainline money, beautiful in the way that requires significant effort to appear effortless. In the early days, she found prosecutors romantic. She loved that Garrison fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. 11 years later, she told him he was boring. Both things, he acknowledged, could be true. The marriage had been unraveling for 2 years before the papers arrived, though Garrison missed it happening in real time. That's what 60-hour weeks on federal cases does to a marriage. You come home to a house, not a relationship. Vivian had tried to tell him she was lonely. He said he understood. She said she wanted more. He said things would slow down. They never did. Prescott Harlow entered the picture 18 months before the divorce. He trained Vivian 3 mornings a week at a Rittenhouse Square gym. 36 years old, leased Porsche, motivational quotes on Instagram at 6 in the morning. Vivian started coming home from sessions, later and later. Garrison noticed the way prosecutors notice things, systematically, quietly, without showing his hand. The credit card statements. The weekend she claimed to be visiting a college friend in Wilmington, except that friend had called the house phone looking for Vivian the same day she was supposedly there. The perfume that wasn't hers. He filed it all away and waited. Then his grandfather died, and everything changed. Theodore Wyatt was not a man anyone expected to be wealthy. He'd spent 40 years running a plumbing supply business out of a Port Richmond warehouse. He drove the same Buick for 16 years, brought his lunch in a paper bag every day, wore the same 3 shirts on rotation. He inspected receipts the way other men inspect legal documents. What nobody knew, not even Garrison's father, was that Theodore had been quietly buying real estate in Philadelphia since 1971. A Fishtown warehouse bought for almost nothing and held through 3 economic cycles. Storefronts on Punk Avenue. A Fairmount parking lot sitting on land that turned out to be very valuable. He never mentioned any of it, never talked about money at all, except to say the secret to having it was never spending it on things you don't need. When Theodore died of a heart attack in February, alone in the Mayfair house where he'd lived since 1968, his estate was worth $4.2 million. He left every cent to Garrison. There was a letter with the will. Theodore's handwriting was small and careful, the script of a man who never wasted anything, including ink. It said, "Garrison, you're the only one who ever asked me how I built the business, instead of just asking me for money from it. That question is worth more than you know. Don't let anybody take what I'm giving you." Deserving isn't the same as earning. Garrison read it 3 times in his grandfather's kitchen, then folded it into his jacket pocket and called his attorney from the funeral home parking lot. The question was simple. With divorce proceedings still pending, was the inheritance at risk? His attorney's answer was equally simple. "Come in tomorrow. Bring everything. Vivian found out about the inheritance from Garrison's uncle Terence, who had expected to be in the will and wasn't, and who apparently had a closer relationship with Garrison's soon-to-be ex-wife than anyone had let on. She started calling Garrison's phone repeatedly while he was in court arguing a wire fraud case. He didn't answer. When the session broke for lunch, he called his attorney instead. Vivian and her lawyer were amending the divorce petition, claiming the inheritance was a marital asset. Their argument was that Garrison had concealed knowledge of the estate's value during discovery, that Theodore's real estate holdings were public record, and that a diligent spouse could reasonably have expected to benefit. It was then that Garrison discovered what Prescott Harlow actually was. Not just a personal trainer, not just a man having an affair with his wife. Prescott's real business was identifying wealthy married women through high-end fitness centers, building trust and intimacy over months, and then presenting fraudulent investment opportunities at exactly the right moment. He'd done it in Charlotte, where a woman named Beverly lost $200,000 before her husband figured it out. He'd done it in Nashville, where a dental practice owner transferred $160,000 to an LLC that dissolved 6 months after Prescott left town. In Scottsdale, a retired DEA agent had almost built enough of a case to stop him, but Prescott caught wind of it and disappeared before anything official could happen. Garrison found all of this the way prosecutors find things. He called people, asked questions, followed the paper trail, tracked down Beverly's husband, spoke to the Nashville victim who would talk if her name stayed out of it, and connected with the former DEA agent through an FBI contact. Then he walked into the FBI field office on Arch Street with a 47-page document and told the Financial Crimes Division he could help them build a federal securities fraud case. Vivian knew none of this. She believed she was in love with a man who was going to take care of her, especially once she had access to a portion of $4.2 million. She had no idea the investment fund he'd been casually mentioning, the one he'd show her the details of once she had some liquidity, was the exact same vehicle he'd used on 3 other women in 3 other cities. When Garrison understood the full picture, what he felt wasn't satisfaction. It was something closer to grief. Whatever Vivian had done to their marriage, she was also a victim, and he'd spent 20 years recognizing exactly what that looked like. But he still had a job to do. The court date was a Thursday in April. Garrison arrived in his closing argument suit, the charcoal one his father had helped him pick out when he made senior trial counsel. Vivian and her attorney Bradford Ellison were already in the hallway. Prescott was with her, one hand on the small of her back, dressed in that particular way that requires careful effort to appear effortless. When Vivian saw Garrison, she looked straight at him and rolled her eyes. Not subtle, theatrical, performed for everyone nearby, a full dismissal. Garrison held her gaze for a moment, nodded politely the way he nods at opposing counsel in federal court, and walked to the courtroom door. Seated in the gallery, in plain clothes, were 2 people Vivian didn't recognize: FBI Special Agent Carla DeWitt from the Financial Crimes Unit and SEC Enforcement Agent Taryn Obi. They were observers. They were not part of the family court proceedings. They were there because Garrison had made certain phone calls 2 days earlier and been told, in the careful language of federal law enforcement, that the timing might intersect with the hearing. The hearing began. Ellison argued aggressively that the inheritance constituted a marital asset, that Garrison had possessed constructive knowledge of its value, that there were serious questions about disclosure failures. Judge Richard Asante, 61 years old, 19 years on the bench, the kind of judge who interrupts people who waste his time, listened carefully. When Ellison's constructive fraud argument came around for the second time, louder, Judge Asante looked over his glasses and asked one direct question. "Mr. Ellison, are you alleging fraud?" Ellison tried to reframe it. The judge wrote something on his notepad with deliberate slowness, then turned to Garrison and asked whether, in his professional opinion, the plaintiff's theory constituted constructive fraud under Pennsylvania statute. Garrison said no. He said Ellison knew that too. And then the courtroom door opened. Agent DeWitt walked in, credentials visible, Agent Obi beside her. They moved past the gallery, past Vivian, directly toward the defendant's table, which was not Garrison's table. Agent DeWitt addressed the judge, apologized for the interruption, and stated clearly that they had a federal arrest warrant for Prescott Harlow, securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud under Title 18 of the United States Code. The silence lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then Vivian made a sound that was somewhere between a question and a gasp, and turned to look at the man she'd been planning her future with. Prescott had gone completely still with the stillness of someone calculating whether any version of the next 60 seconds could work in his favor. He looked at the agents and said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." There had not been a misunderstanding. 7 counts across 4 states, over $800,000 defrauded from multiple victims. Vivian was not charged. She was a victim, even if she didn't fully understand that yet. The $47,000 she had quietly transferred from her parents' account to Prescott's investment vehicle was now evidence. Judge Asante recessed for 30 minutes, then reconvened and ruled without ceremony. The inheritance was discovered property under Pennsylvania law. No credible evidence of concealment or constructive fraud existed. The amended petition was dismissed. He looked toward Ellison's table as he delivered the final line, dry and precise. The court notes that the defendant, Mr. Wyatt, appears to have been rather more forthcoming with material information than the opposing party had anticipated. He said it once. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Garrison drove back to his office on Market Street and sat at his desk for an hour. Not celebrating, processing. He had walked in that morning as a man his ex-wife's team believed they could outmaneuver. They'd assumed he would do what careful, methodical people do, build a case slowly, trust the process, lose gracefully. They had miscalculated, because they had never seen what 20 years of learning to see around corners actually looked like when it mattered. He called his father. Raymond Wyatt answered on the second ring. "Dad, it's done." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "Your grandfather always said you were the one who paid attention." Garrison looked out the window at Market Street, the buses, the foot traffic, the city that made him. "Yeah," he said. "Let me tell you what happened." In the months that followed, Vivian filed for bankruptcy. Between Prescott's fraud, Ellison's legal fees, and an apartment she'd leased against a settlement that never arrived, she'd extended herself beyond recovery. Prescott Harlow was indicted on 7 federal counts. 3 of his previous victims agreed to testify. The former DEA agent from Scottsdale, Vincent Cordero, gave a deposition that was by all accounts devastating. Uncle Terrence threatened to contest the estate. He did not ultimately contest the estate. Garrison kept the Mayfair house. He had no plans to live there, but he wasn't ready for someone else to own it. The kitchen table where Theodore taught him chess is still there. The coffee maker from the 90s still sits on the counter. He goes on Sunday mornings sometimes, drinks coffee, and thinks about what it means to build something quietly over 50 years and leave it to the one person who thought to ask the right question. He set up a scholarship fund at Temple University for first-generation law students from North Philadelphia. His father attended the announcement in a new suit and wore the face he makes when he's too proud to say he's proud. And tucked inside the back cover of that old chess set, Garrison eventually found one more note. Old paper, soft at the folds. Theodore's handwriting, faded but legible. Garrison, the endgame is not about the last move. It's about the 15 moves you made before the other player understood what you were doing. He put it in his wallet. He carries it everywhere. Because that's the thing about being underestimated. The people doing it think they're saving themselves the effort of watching you carefully. They get comfortable. They get careless. And that is exactly when you do your best work.